There are people who, when their birthday arrives, feel no impulse to announce it. They do not decorate their day with glitter, nor do they post reminders online seeking congratulations. To the outside world, it may seem as though they are indifferent or emotionally distant, but what truly unfolds within them is something much more complex. The quiet withdrawal from the persona. This withdrawal is not a rejection of joy, but a movement inward, away from the social masks that define so much of our identity. It is the act of stepping back from the performative self, from the version of me that exists to please, impress, or be seen. From the moment we are born, society begins shaping us into a persona. We learn that to be accepted, we must smile even when we don't feel like it, that our worth is measured through external validation, and that milestones, like birthdays, are stages upon which we must perform happiness. The persona becomes our costume in the theater of life, a mask we wear to fit the collective script. But for some, the birthday becomes the day they refuse to wear it. They begin to sense that celebration is not the same as authenticity, and that being seen is not the same as being known. The withdrawal from persona is the beginning of a deep psychological maturity. The moment one begins to live not for the gaze of others, but for the truth of one's inner self. To withdraw from the persona is to detach from the illusions that others' approval sustains us. It is to recognize how much of our happiness has been built upon performance. For the one who treats their birthday like a normal day, this detachment can appear subtle but is profound. It represents the quiet rebellion against social conditioning. They no longer need an audience to confirm their existence. They no longer define self-worth through the collective chorus of happy birthdays. Their stillness is not sadness. It is liberation from the compulsion to appear joyful for others' comfort. The withdrawal from persona often comes after a period of inner fatigue. The individual has spent years being who the world expected them to be: grateful, cheerful, accommodating. Over time, the endless cycle of pretending becomes exhausting. There arrives a moment when authenticity begins to whisper louder than acceptance. This whisper says, "You are not here to perform happiness, you are here to live truth." On their birthday, while the world celebrates the image of birth, they are contemplating rebirth, the rebirth of selfhood without masks. This withdrawal also represents a confrontation with the self behind the mirror. When one stops seeking validation through celebration, one must face the quieter question, who am I without others watching? Many avoid this question, hiding behind rituals of celebration to escape the discomfort of inner silence. But those who embrace the quiet birthday do not run from it. They enter it willingly, knowing that solitude is the price of self-knowledge. To them, the absence of performance is not emptiness, but space. Space for genuine reflection, space for presence, space to feel rather than to display. There is also a spiritual depth to this psychological movement. In withdrawing from persona, a person begins to experience the sacredness of authenticity. They start to value the invisible more than the visible, the truth of their emotions more than the appearance of joy. In silence, they encounter something that no crowd can offer, the feeling of being whole without witness. The external noise of celebration fades, and what remains is an intimate conversation with the soul. This is the moment the individual begins to touch their essence beyond personality, beyond the social self. The withdrawal from persona does not mean they dislike celebration or connection. It simply means they are learning to exist without the need to be seen. They are not rejecting others, they are returning to themselves. In this withdrawal, they discover that identity is not a role but a process, not a costume but a consciousness. When they no longer depend on the external to feel complete, they start to experience life from within. They understand that being alive is not proven through a birthday party, but through presence, through the awareness of one's inner evolution. Every year, when their birthday passes quietly, they are practicing something rare in a world obsessed with display. They are honoring the invisible growth that no one claps for. They are listening to the inner voice that says, "You do not need to announce your existence to make it real." Their calmness is not emotional detachment. It is the serenity of one who has stepped off the stage and found meaning in the wings. The persona dissolves not in sadness but in awakening. For the one who no longer performs, life itself becomes the quiet celebration of authenticity that no applause can measure. For most people, a birthday is a loud reminder that time is passing, a marker of survival, growth, and social acknowledgement. But for others, it is not a day of festivity, it is a quiet conversation between the self and time itself. They do not count candles or presents, they count moments of awareness, the lessons carved into the heart and the distances traveled in silence. While the world rushes to celebrate, they retreat inward into a space where time becomes a mirror rather than a calendar. This is the silent dialogue with time, a private communion between the finite and the eternal within one's being. Those who treat their birthday like a normal day are not indifferent to life. They simply have a different relationship with time. They have moved beyond the social interpretation of age as progress or decay and entered a psychological space where time is not an enemy nor a trophy, but a teacher. To them, the turning of another year does not symbolize something gained or lost. It represents another layer of consciousness unfolding. They feel the weight of each passing year, but not as a burden, rather as a conversation. They listen to time whispering lessons that cannot be learned through celebration. They hear it asking, softly yet insistently, "What have you done with the days I gave you?" In this silent dialogue, there is a profound stillness. It is the stillness of awareness. These individuals do not fear aging, nor do they worship youth. They have come to understand that time is neither friend nor foe. It is the canvas upon which their inner world evolves. Each year, instead of counting how much of life has passed, they reflect on how deeply they have lived. They notice how certain wounds have softened, how old desires have transformed, and how their understanding of existence has matured. For them, a birthday is not about marking another revolution around the sun, but recognizing how the soul has revolved around its own axis of growth. The silence of this dialogue often emerges after one has outgrown the noise of external validation. There may have been a time when birthdays mattered greatly, when the excitement of being remembered and celebrated felt like proof of belonging. But as consciousness deepens, one begins to realize that no number of greetings can fill the quiet questions that time asks. The deeper self begins to crave meaning, not attention, reflection, not ritual. And so the birthday becomes less about others remembering and more about remembering oneself. It becomes a meditative checkpoint rather than a social event. In the quiet of such a day, the mind drifts inward, replaying fragments of the past, not as nostalgia, but as observation. There is no self-pity for what has ended, nor pride for what has been achieved. There is simply awareness. Awareness that time has taken and given in equal measure. Awareness that every loss has carved space for understanding, and every joy has left its fragrance in memory. The individual who engages in this dialogue does not resist time, they walk beside it, acknowledging its power without surrendering to fear. They have learned that to live is to age, and that to age is to understand. The silent dialogue with time also reveals an unspoken truth that moments cannot be owned, only experienced. Those who have come to this realization no longer cling to youth or chase milestones. They move through life with acceptance, allowing each year to be what it is, a continuation, not a climax. They may look at their reflection on their birthday, not to count wrinkles or years, but to recognize the story written upon their face. The eyes that once looked forward with expectation now look inward with understanding. The passage of time no longer feels like a thief, but like a sculptor shaping the soul with invisible hands. There is a humility in this way of being. To engage in a silent dialogue with time is to surrender the illusion of control. It is to understand that the clock does not serve us, it accompanies us. Time does not wait, nor does it hurry. It simply unfolds, indifferent yet intimate, and in that unfolding, it reveals to the quiet observer that life's meaning does not lie in how many years one has lived, but in how consciously those years were inhabited. For them, the birthday becomes a sacred pause, a chance to feel the invisible motion of life, to sense how the past still breathes within the present. In their silence, there is reverence. They do not ignore their birthday, they honor it differently. Instead of seeking noise, they listen. Instead of lighting candles, they let awareness illuminate the mind. The dialogue they hold with time is not spoken aloud, yet it resonates deeply. It is the conversation between the mortal and the eternal, between who they were and who they are still becoming. Each year that passes is not a step closer to an ending, but a deepening into essence. And so, their quietness is not detachment from life, it is communion with its most elusive truth. For many, a birthday is expected to be a day of affection, warmth, and remembrance. A day when love should surround you effortlessly. But for some, the day carries a heaviness that is not visible to others. Beneath their calmness or indifference lies a silent residue of unmet expectations, forgotten gestures, and invisible wounds. This is what can be called the shadow of disappointment, a subtle emotional imprint left by moments when the world did not meet the heart's quiet hopes. Those who treat their birthday like any other day often do, so not because they lack feeling, but because they have learned through experience that expectation is the birthplace of pain. In childhood, birthdays often hold an almost magical significance. The child believes that the day will bring joy, surprises, and love that confirms their worth. But when that love is inconsistent, absent, or conditional, something inside begins to shift. The birthday becomes not a celebration, but a reminder. A day that highlights who remembered and who didn't, who cared and who was indifferent. This early experience plants a seed deep within the psyche. Over time, that seed grows into emotional caution. The person learns that the less they expect, the less they can be hurt. What looks like indifference is actually a defense mechanism, a silent vow made to oneself: I will no longer give disappointment the power to wound me. The shadow of disappointment is quiet but persistent. It lingers in the background, shaping one's emotional patterns. When a person stops celebrating their birthday, they are often trying to detach from that shadow. They are not running away from life. They are protecting their heart from repeating old emotional scripts. There is a quiet wisdom in this withdrawal, the understanding that vulnerability without safety can be exhausting. Yet, even as they withdraw, the shadow remains, a soft ache that whispers reminders of forgotten moments, of expectations once carried too tenderly. The psychology of this shadow is rooted in unmet recognition. Every human being holds a primal need to be seen, not just physically, but emotionally. The birthday, symbolically, represents that recognition, a day when one's existence should be acknowledged. When that acknowledgement fails to arrive, it leaves a trace of emotional invisibility. The individual begins to internalize the belief that being celebrated is not for them, that their existence is something to bear quietly rather than something to be honored. Over the years, they develop emotional independence, but beneath that strength lies a subtle grief, a mourning for the celebration that never truly came. The shadow of disappointment is not only about others forgetting, it is also about the self's lost trust. Each unmet expectation becomes an internal scar, teaching the heart to anticipate emptiness instead of love. The birthday then transforms from a day of potential joy into a test of emotional endurance. To avoid disappointment, the person numbs expectation altogether. They may say, "It's just another day." But beneath that phrase lies an entire history of emotional negotiation. It is not apathy, it is self-preservation. It is the psyche's way of maintaining dignity in a world that once forgot to mirror its worth. This shadow also exposes the deeper human struggle between the desire for connection and the fear of being let down. Those who act detached on their birthdays often still feel the undercurrent of longing, the wish that someone would remember without being reminded, that someone would care enough without being asked. But this wish remains buried, hidden beneath layers of composure. They have learned to appear unaffected because to reveal desire is to risk exposure, and exposure invites potential pain. Thus, silence becomes the safest emotional armor. In the deeper layers of this shadow lies a paradox. The very act of pretending the day doesn't matter is often proof that it still does. Their indifference is not emptiness, it is restraint. It is the conscious choice to contain vulnerability, to hold the heart within boundaries that keep it from breaking again. Yet, this containment also creates distance. While it shields them from disappointment, it also prevents them from receiving the genuine warmth that could heal that old wound. The shadow of disappointment teaches control, but often at the cost of openness. There is also a cultural dimension that intensifies this inner tension. Society glorifies celebration as proof of happiness. Those who abstain from it are often misunderstood, labeled as cold or cynical. But in truth, they are simply those who have felt the sting of neglect too deeply to pretend anymore. They have seen that joy cannot be manufactured through social ritual, and that love is not validated by a date on the calendar. Their quiet detachment is an act of emotional honesty, a refusal to perform happiness they do not feel. The shadow of disappointment never truly disappears. It becomes part of one's emotional landscape, shaping how they relate to others and to themselves. It teaches self-reliance, but also loneliness, strength, but also restraint. On the surface, the person may say they don't care about their birthday, Yet beneath that calm exterior lies the memory of every unlit candle, every forgotten call, every unspoken wish that someone would simply say, "I'm glad you exist." It is in this quiet contradiction that the depth of their psychology unfolds. A soul that learned to survive not by celebration, but by silence. There comes a point in a person's psychological evolution when surface level celebrations begin to lose their charm. The noise, the lights, the greetings, all start to feel strangely hollow. The individual who once found joy in being remembered or admired begins to sense that something deeper is missing. This quiet discontent marks the beginning of the pursuit of authentic meaning. It is the moment when the soul no longer hungers for attention, but for alignment. For those who treat their birthday as just another day, this pursuit has often already begun. Their indifference to celebration is not the absence of joy, but the presence of a more refined longing. The desire to live in truth rather than performance. The modern world thrives on symbols of significance. Birthdays, anniversaries, and milestones are structured moments meant to validate our sense of existence. Yet, for some, the structure feels confining, even artificial. They begin to sense that the meaning of life cannot be contained within a date, a number, or a ritual. When such individuals turn away from birthday celebrations, it is rarely out of disdain for happiness. It is because they are seeking something that feels more real. They are searching for meaning that does not require witnesses, a sense of worth that does not depend on others remembering it. Their silence is not emptiness, it is an inner journey toward authenticity. In the pursuit of authentic meaning, one begins to dismantle the illusions built by external validation. There is a quiet recognition that the activities we perform for belonging often keep us distant from our own essence. The one who withdraws from celebration is, in truth, creating space to feel life directly without interpretation or display. They no longer want to appear fulfilled. They want to be fulfilled. This desire leads them inward toward introspection and solitude. What once felt joyful in crowds now feels distracting. The laughter that once surrounded them begins to sound like echoes from a world they no longer fully inhabit. The birthday becomes a mirror in this stage of awareness. Each passing year is not measured in numbers, but in depth. How deeply one has understood, how consciously one has lived, how honestly one has loved. The person who no longer celebrates is not detached from life. They are intimately engaged with it, but from the inside, they are asking questions that parties cannot answer. Who am I beneath all that I have become? What parts of me have I neglected in pursuit of approval? What truly matters when the applause fades? These questions mark the threshold between superficial existence and inner authenticity. They signal the transition from being defined by others to being guided by the self. The pursuit of authentic meaning often begins in silence because silence is the only place where truth can be heard. Those who seek it tend to withdraw, not because they are antisocial, but because they have discovered that meaning cannot be found in noise. They begin to notice how much of life's joy has been borrowed from social approval, borrowed from external affirmation. Once that realization sets in, the very idea of celebration changes. They may still appreciate gestures of love, but they no longer depend on them. Their sense of fulfillment now arises from inner clarity rather than external acknowledgement. In this inner pursuit, the relationship with time itself transforms. A birthday ceases to be a marker of getting older and becomes a point of reflection, a quiet checkpoint in the journey toward wholeness. The person asks not how many years they have lived, but how authentically they have lived those years. What have they done with their time that truly matters? What experiences have shaped their understanding of life? What wisdom have they integrated in their being? The day becomes less about celebration and more about self-conversation. In that conversation, they are not seeking praise, but awareness. The pursuit of authentic meaning also reflects a psychological integration. The individual begins to reconcile the parts of themselves they once ignored. The persona, the ego, the shadow, all begin to merge into a more unified sense of self. The person who once sought meaning in approval now finds meaning in understanding. Instead of asking the world, "Do you see me?" they ask themselves, "Do I see myself clearly?" This shift marks an essential transformation in consciousness from external dependence to inner self-sufficiency. It is the stage where fulfillment no longer requires validation and peace no longer requires an audience. In a world obsessed with constant self-promotion, those who retreat into authenticity may appear distant or detached. Yet they are often the ones most connected to life's essence. Their refusal to dramatize their birthday is not a denial of existence, but an affirmation of being. They no longer wish to celebrate existence through symbols. They wish to live it directly. The search for authentic meaning replaces the need for acknowledgement. What matters to them is not how loudly life applauds, but how deeply it is understood. The quietness that surrounds them is not loneliness. It is alignment with something more enduring than time, more truthful than words, and more sacred than celebration. There exists a type of person who moves through life not as a performer upon a stage, but as a watcher of their own unfolding story. They participate in the world, yet simultaneously stand apart from it, observing their own thoughts, reactions, and emotions with quiet curiosity. These are the self-observers, the ones who live with an inward gaze, constantly reflecting on the meaning behind their experiences. When such individuals treat their birthday like a normal day, it is not from coldness or detachment. It is because they are oriented toward the inner landscape rather than the outer display. Their attention is directed not toward what the world sees, but toward what the soul understands. They embody what can be called the archetype of the self-observer, a psychological pattern rooted in awareness, introspection, and the desire for authenticity. The self-observer archetype emerges when a person begins to differentiate between the I that acts and the I that witnesses. Most people live fully identified with their actions, desires, and roles they are immersed in doing. But the self-observer stands slightly behind experience, watching it unfold with mindful detachment. They do not withdraw from life. They engage with it consciously, always asking, "What is this teaching me? What truth lies behind this emotion?" Their relationship with themselves is reflective rather than reactive. A birthday, therefore, is not an event to them. It is a psychological moment, an occasion to observe how they relate to the passage of time, to growth, and to their evolving identity. For the self-observer, meaning is found not in celebration, but in contemplation. When others gather to mark another year, they may quietly reflect on the year's emotional landscapes, the triumphs, the losses, the moments of stillness that reshaped them. Their lack of outward enthusiasm is not an absence of gratitude, but a presence of awareness. They do not need to externalize joy to feel it. They are not dismissing life. They are listening to it more deeply. In a sense, their life becomes a study in consciousness. Every experience, even the simple passage of another year, becomes material for inner observation. The psychology of this archetype is rooted in individuation, the process of becoming aware of one's true nature beyond social identity. The self-observer does not seek to impress or to conform. They do not need to post proof of their existence on social media or announce their milestones to feel alive. Instead, they turn inward to witness how their inner world shifts with time. They notice how they respond to aging, how their values evolve, how certain attachments dissolve. This witnessing becomes their form of celebration, quiet, solitary, but deeply transformative. They do not run from their emotions, they study them. They do not hide from the truth of impermanence. They face it with gentle awareness. The archetype of the self-observer also carries a kind of sacred neutrality. Such individuals often experience life through a lens of observation rather than judgment. They watch the rise and fall of their moods without labeling them as good or bad. They observe the joy of connection and the sting of disappointment as natural rhythms of human existence. Because of this perspective, they approach their birthday not as an occasion to perform happiness, but as a chance to measure awareness. How much of the self remains unconscious? How much has awakened? How much has been understood? For them, the true gift of another year is not external acknowledgement, but deeper insight into the mystery of being. This archetype often arises after one has lived long enough to see the illusions of social validation. They may have once sought attention, approval, or belonging, but over time, they discovered that these pursuits lead only to temporary satisfaction. The observer within them began to awaken, the part that quietly asks, what is all this noise really for? From that moment on, they began to step out of the collective performance and into a more solitary journey. When their birthday arrives, they no longer crave affirmation from others because their awareness itself becomes the source of meaning. The observer in them does not need an audience, it needs truth. To live as a self-observer is to live in dialogue with the inner world. It is to watch thoughts without clinging to them, to feel emotions without becoming enslaved by them. On their birthday, such a person does not see age as a number, but as a mirror, one that reflects the evolution of their consciousness. They may sit quietly, revisiting their memories not for nostalgia, but for understanding. Each recollection becomes a lesson. Each year becomes a chapter in the unfolding narrative of self-awareness. Their stillness is not withdrawal, but presence. Not apathy, but clarity. The archetype of the self-observer is also marked by humility. Those who embody it do not assume mastery over life. They simply seek to understand its movements. They approach existence as both participant and witness, aware that every moment carries meaning beyond what is visible. When they choose to spend their birthday in solitude, it is not rejection but reverence, a way of honoring the quiet teacher within. They have realized that the truest form of celebration is awareness itself. The observer within them watches the flow of time, the shifting of identity, the dance between the outer and inner worlds, and through that observation, they come closer to truth